Founder and president Lila Rose started live action when she was just 15 years old from her family's living room. Since that time, live action has grown to become one of the leading national pro-life and human rights organizations in America, dedicated to ending abortion and inspiring a culture that respects and defends life.
Throughout history, whenever great injustices existed, youth movements have risen up to combat and end those injustices.
You have organizations out there like the Center for Bioethical Reform,
the Center for Bioethical Reform,
Canadian Center for Bioethical Reform,
organizations like the Center for Bioethical Reform to receive public funds when they then use to attack a woman's right to choose.
Abortion kills all kinds of people, so then all kinds of people can join the pro-life movement to save these babies.
I was talking to a young man on the streets of Toronto.
I spoke with a woman named Lucy about abortion.
Today we were doing Choice Chain in downtown Regina.
By the end of the conversation, she was completely pro-life.
He then walked away 100% pro-life.
Completely pro-life.
We should remember that each of those babies that die every day in Canada not only have the right to life that's being violated, they also have the right to our defense.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Pro-Life Guys podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in once again. My name is Peter. I'm the host of the show, and with me is my wonderful co-host, Cameron Cote. How are you, sir?
I am doing very well, Peter. How are you?
Yes, really, really good. I'm excited for the conversation that we are having today. But before we get into that, for those of you who are new to the program, who are the Pro-Life Guys? Well, we are two guys who are passionate about ending the killing of preborn children in Canada, which is where we live. And this is a podcast dedicated to giving you the tools that you need to change minds and save lives from abortion. What we want to do is inform you about the culture war, and what we want to do is to give you the conversational and apologetic tools and methods and strategies and tactics that we use on the streets so that you too can have effective and winsome conversations about abortions. So go check out the other episodes that we have. There are some that are more apologetic. There are some where we have guests to talk about the work that they are doing. But thank you so much for tuning in. Today we have a special guest on the program. We've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time now. Her name is Lila Rose. For some of you, she needs no introduction whatsoever, but I will give her an introduction here. She's a writer, a speaker, and an activist. And like I mentioned in the opening of the program, she founded and serves as the president of Live Action, a human rights nonprofit with the largest digital footprint for the global pro-life movement. Lila is the author of her new book, which is coming out very soon, Fighting for Life, Becoming a Force for Change in a Wounded World. We briefly touch on that towards the end of the episode. And if you want to get a copy of the book, go check out the show notes, click the links, and get that book. It's coming out in about a month and a half from when we're recording, May 4, for those of you who are not watching this or listening to it the day we're recording. Lila's investigative reporting on the abortion industry has been featured in most major news outlets. We're going to be talking about that investigative reporting and those undercover stings today with Lila, but it has been reported in the LA Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, the CBS and ABC Nightline. Lila Rose has written for The Hill, Politico, USA Today, and First Things, among others. She speaks internationally on family issues, on cultural issues, and has addressed members of the European Parliament and spoken at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. She has been named, and this is pretty cool, she has been named among National Journal's 25 most influential Washington women under 35 and Christianity Today's 33 under 33. She is the host of The Lila Rose Show, a podcast that tackles relationships, faith, culture, politics, and more. She's a native to the San Francisco Bay Area, and she lives there with her husband and her young son. We're excited about this, so let's dive in. We hope you enjoy this conversation just as much as we did. Lila Rose, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us on the Pro-Life Guys podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Okay, so Many years ago, a 15-year-old Lila Rose in 2003 started live action in your parents' living room, which is a phenomenal beginning to a great story. Could you share with us a little bit about how you got to know about what abortion was, the evil of abortion, and why you thought it was important to get involved in the movement and to be active?
Sure, of course. So all of our stories, I think, start with the realization of what abortion is. All of our stories who are pro-life activists. And so for me, I had this encounter when I was around 9 years old with this book in my parents' house. I'm from a big family, I'm one of 8 kids. My parents were pro-life, but they weren't activists. And I grew up in in Northern California in San Jose. And I came across this book in my parents' house called A Handbook about Abortion by Dr. and Mrs. Wilkie. And in the center of it were this centerfold with images. And for the first time in my life, I'm looking at the child in the first trimester, 10 weeks old, who'd been suctioned into pieces by a powerful first trimester section abortion. And I was like, probably 9 years old at the time. And I was deeply moved by this, and I was deeply saddened by this. And I wanted to learn more. I learned that there's at the time over 3,000 abortions annually or daily in the United States, that this had been legal before I was even born, that this was prevalent and it was seen as a, quote unquote, women's right, and that this was the death of children. And so as I started to learn more, I became more and more passionate. And it sort of culminated for me when I was 14 years old. And I just, wrote a book telling a lot of these stories. It's a guidebook for activists called Fighting for Life. But I talk about how and once, when I'm about 14, I'm starting to get involved in some pro-life work. But I go to an abortion clinic for the first time. And I'm outside this big Planned Parenthood in downtown San Jose to pray with a couple friends and to have just, pass out brochures to any women who are going in if they'll just receive them with prenatal care help and other resources. And I remember just being so deeply struck by looking at all these women going into this abortion clinic and looking at those women crying and just like a very desolate scene, and realizing that I was within yards of an abortionist, a paid murderer who was literally dismembering living children, human babies. And, this clinic killed children up to 6 months old in utero. So babies that can survive outside the womb with medical help. And I remember just standing there, I couldn't call the police. There was nobody to stop it. It was legal. It was protected. And I thought, I can't not do something, this has to be my cause, because it's so accepted. It's become so normalized, and we have to stop the killing. And so that inspired me to start Live Action and really dedicate so much of my life to the pro-life cause.
That's super, super interesting, Lila. And I love hearing that kind of awakening story. I feel like for so many of us who become activists in the pro-life movement, like you mentioned, it's kind of this blindsiding of getting hit out of nowhere at times with this abortion issue and realizing that all of the plans that we may have lined up for ourselves are now going off to the side so that we can pursue this deep, deep injustice that is so deeply rooted in our society. I'd love to ask, and I'm sure that you touch on this in the book as well. I don't want to spoil too much about the book, but so as a 15-year-old girl, I'm sure that pro-life activism wasn't the only thing on everyone's mind. I think when I was in high school and I was just pursuing sports with everything that I was doing, I wasn't thinking about much else beyond that. What was it like kind of deepening your pro-life involvement in high school and within your peer group? Was that something that you were doing alone? Was that something that you were doing with friends? What did that look like at your high school as you took on more of that role?
Sure. Well, first of all, I was homeschooled. So, my high school experience was a little different than average. I mean, I did go to the community college and we had a part-time high school that I attended twice a week. So I definitely had some of that typical high school experience, but definitely also different. I had a lot of different friends, and some joined me and would come to Pro-Life Club and come to Live Action. We'd, talk about how can we educate our community and do different things. There are other friends who kind of, maybe tolerated what I was doing. They weren't necessarily super supportive or against it. They just sort of were like, okay, that's what she's into. But as Live Action developed and I started doing investigative reporting in college, and then we started to really, I think friends saw that, wow, this isn't just some extracurricular she's doing. This is like her cause. And it became more evident and the work became more public. There definitely were some friends who were upset, who, were not supportive. And, that was part of the navigation of being an activist and standing up for something that most people are apathetic to or have even come to accept. And I think that's the story of any activist. I talk about this in Fighting for Life in my book, where, we have to leave our comfort zone and we have to be willing to stand alone sometimes. I have a chapter called Prepare to Stand Alone, and it's about, and I know you guys are totally familiar with this too, you have to be willing to know that there will be lonely moments, but leadership is lonely. And, but if you forge the path, people will follow. And that's what I ended up discovering, after putting in so much time and effort and, making a lot of mistakes along the way, doing activism and work. Now Live Action has over 5 million people following us. And, we've been able to do a lot of great things. But the secret was perseverance, even though there were lonely moments and there were certainly hostile moments.
I love how so many of us can relate to the idea of, you do this pro-life activism and you might do an internship here and a week off work there to do some pro-life thing. But everyone expects you to settle down and get a real job and
be normal.
And be normal. Yeah. Just get a normal job. That's right. And then they all scratch their head wondering man, she's taking ownership of this movement. What a very strange thing to do. And I have to say, from the guests we've had on, from the people we know, that certainly is a common theme for those of us who work in the pro-life movement.
For those listening, we need more professional people full-time in the pro-life movement. I mean, I think people are like, oh, good job, good job, guys, go do the work, I'll donate, but we need people from every background with every skill set and every experience level to join the movement full-time to really end this thing. I mean, we have to take it extremely seriously. We need world-class talent and people willing to just put in the work. So, it's not just for us. I try to tell people, this isn't some weird unique calling that I have. I think we all share responsibility to solve the problem and to respond to the crisis. It's going to look different for each of us, but I would urge people to prayerfully consider maybe this is something God's calling you to full time.
Yeah, I think of the quote that Greg Cunningham said that at one point. He said there are more people working full time to kill babies than there are to save them. Yeah. And the people working full time to kill them, they're the doctors, they're the nurses, they're the OBGYNs. They're the people with good careers. And so we, as pro-lifers, really need to take stock of what our priorities are in many ways, as communities, as churches, as pro-life groups, and really, like you say, see whether this is something for us, not a special calling written in the clouds that God wants us to do, but a real life way to stand up for the vulnerable and the weak. Now, so this is what you do with Live Action. This is a big part of what you do is defending and protecting preborn children. Now, you have 5 million followers right now, but when you were 15 years old in your parents' living room, Live Action was an idea. Live Action was in its inception. So could you share with us, what was your initial plan for Live Action? What did you want to do? And what did the first, little bit of time look like as you tried to, get people involved, get people trained, all of that? What was it that you were trying to do with Live Action?
Sure. Well, the original focus of Live Action was to educate our peers. And in San Jose, California, at the time, there's over 1 million people. I mean, the Bay Area is multi-millions of people. And I started Live Action because there was no other pro-life education group that I could join. I mean, I tried to join a group before I started one, but there wasn't one to join, so I started one. And it was a lot of trial and error even doing that. But, the goal was educate my fellow peers. And so we ended up getting in touch with another group that was located in Central California, several hours drive south of us. And they volunteered to help us learn how to train to give speeches and on presentations. And so we ended up giving presentations to dozens of churches and youth groups about abortion. And that described the abortion procedure, fetal development, abortion risks for Christian audiences, the Christian response to abortion. And that was the path. And then once I got to college, I started trying different approaches because you can just give presentations all day long to your fellow students. You had to be a little more creative than that. And so I started also doing investigative reporting, and that launched Live Action's, you could say, media-centric focus, which was still educational in nature, but it took on different tactics to achieve that education mission.
I think that leap into that investigative journalism is such a fascinating one because it not only is it so important, but it's so unique as well. That there's so many lies and deceptions that are shrouded around the abortion industry, the abortion injustice around the world, in America, in Canada, and elsewhere. And share a little bit about the development of that idea going from, giving presentations to peers to taking on an entirely different persona and going undercover into these Planned Parenthood clinics to show the heinous kind of acceptance and what they're willing to cover up that you're able to expose through the investigative journalism that I'm sure many people are somewhat familiar with, but share a little bit more about that and what that was like, really going undercover and taking on that new persona, I guess.
Sure. So, as I was researching and studying the abortion issue a lot in high school and then entering into college, I realized, one of the biggest themes of the abortion industry was deception and, outright lies about what abortion is. And, the reason abortion exists is because people tolerate it. And the reason people tolerate it is because most people don't know really what it is. They've never had that emotional, intellectual connection with, wow, this is a baby that's being slaughtered. I mean, they just think about it in terms of choice, or women's empowerment or reproductive freedom. I mean, these really positive sounding phrases that the abortion industry and lobby has used for decades to justify, what is now the killing of over 60 million children in the United States alone since its legalization. So as I was studying this, I realized, we need to cut through the lies. And then also, media groups are not, they're not exposing abortion clinics. The school system is not like teaching the truth facts about abortion. There's whole systems and structures that are set up to support abortion. The status quo is pro-abortion. And so to cut through that noise, somebody has to present the truth and use a different route to do that, because your traditional gatekeepers are not going to let you. It's not like the media is going to let you, call them up and be like, hey, you should do a story on abortion. I mean, no, they're not interested. They don't care. They're not going to go, when Kermit Gosnell, an infamous abortionist in the United States, was finally put to trial for murdering born alive infants. He would sever the spinal cords of born alive infants in his Philadelphia abortion clinic. At times, the press section was even empty in his courtroom. It took time for the media even to show an interest in the story, even though it was so riveting. He was a mass murderer, and those cases are usually very interesting to media. So anyways, I say all that to say, when I got to UCLA, I started doing reporting. I wrote an article for my school newspaper. They accepted one, but they weren't going to accept more, much more than that. And I wanted to start my own magazine or my own newspaper to report on abortion and related issues. And so I did that. And then I met James O'Keefe, who at the time was working for the Leadership Institute, giving a presentation on student reporting at my school, which I attended. And we just started to get in touch. And at the time, he was fresh out of college, but he would go on, as some folks know, to found his own investigative organization called Veritas. And I talked, and he said, well, why don't you just do investigative reporting of your own institution and local abortion clinics eventually? So, building on the work of other activists, I was very familiar with Mark Crutcher of Life Dynamics in Texas, which, he did amazing work investigating the abortion industry for decades, very underreported what he did. But I was like, how do I do what he did, but make it even more public, make it even more, expose it here in Los Angeles where my school is, and make it even, get as many eyeballs on it as possible. And that was particularly exposing sexual abuse cover-up of young girls at abortion clinics, which is another one of the many angles of illicit activity that happen at abortion clinics. When you disrespect the child and kill the child, you don't have a lot of respect for the mother. So all that to say, I started, after a lot of trial and error and studying, and, ultimately it was just like, okay, I'm going to try this. I got a camcorder, I got a voice recorder. I did my research. I, read up on investigative reporting as best I could. It wasn't like I was formally trained for it, but I began doing investigative reporting, and I went undercover into 2 Los Angeles abortion clinics. And I also went undercover at my student health center.
That's amazing. So let's jump into this a little bit, Lila. You did the research, you looked into these clinics, you knew there was something wrong, which is actually fascinating because Planned Parenthood and the pro-abortion movement says that they support women and women's rights and all of that. And then some of the things that your undercover investigative stings showed was that was actually not in fact the case at all, but they didn't care about women at all. And so could you tell us about that first time that you went to an abortion clinic undercover? I mean, you had your camcorder, you had your microphone. What was it like? What were you feeling? And what was one of the goals, or what were some of the goals that you wanted to get out of that one specifically? Did you have anything specific, or were you just thinking, this is the persona I'm going to take on. Let's see where the conversation goes. Let's see what happens. But tell us like how you were feeling in that first time and some of the things you uncovered that first time you went out.
Sure. Well, investigative reporting, part of it is exploratory. Part of it is testing theories. You don't want to go in there and assume you know exactly what will happen, even though you have a very strong idea that this is what is happening. But undercover reporting is to further prove out your theory. Is this theory happening? And you really want to take it at face value, in the sense that you want to be as realistic as possible with your undercover reporting to present scenarios that are as realistic as possible for the focus of your investigation, so that you can really see how they're actually responding. And so for me, that meant in trying to expose sexual abuse cover-up at abortion clinics, I was going off of Mark Crutcher's work. He had done a survey phone call years before of over 800 Planned Parenthood facilities, with a young girl on the phone posing as underage, seeking an abortion, and saying that she had a much older partner. And over 90% of the clinics that she called effectively told her via phone that they had a don't ask, don't tell policy on sexual abuse, meaning we're not going to ask any questions, just come in for a secret abortion. Now, that's technically against the law in most 50 states, meaning you are supposed to report even suspected child sexual abuse if there's child sexual activity happening, if there's pregnancy, shows that there was some sort of assault or statutory rape. You are supposed to report that immediately to Child Protective Services or to a government agency or to the police, whatever. So I wanted to take on that persona, a young girl who is the victim of sexual abuse, an older partner, as many young girls fare, who's pregnant, who's sent to an abortion clinic, often coerced, sent, to cover up the crime. And what happens to her at these Planned Parenthoods, these tax-funded, government-supported Planned Parenthoods. And so my first Planned Parenthood walking into was in Los Angeles, posing as a 15-year-old girl with a much older boyfriend in his early 20s, saying that, I was pregnant, what do I do? And it was shocking to me. So the script was pretty straightforward. I was just presenting myself to see how they would respond. So there wasn't some elaborate, I'm going to get them to say this or that. I really wanted to see, how do you respond to an underage girl alone who's pregnant, who indicates she's in a sexual relationship with a much older man, which is fairly rare for a girl to be explicit about. So I wasn't going in there saying, I'm in a relationship with a much older man. I was going to only offer that information depending on how the conversation, if that was something they solicited. So I wanted to present it as naturally as possible. Long story short, I go in, there's paperwork to fill out. I ask for help on it. I say, they're asking my age, what do you need this for? And they say, well, we need you to put down. And I said, well, I'm only 15. And then, they said, okay. And I indicated distress, because to put down in the paperwork my age, and it's asking about my partner who's much older, am I going to get in trouble? And I said, well, and he's much older, he's 23. And then the Planned Parenthood worker didn't even skip a beat. I mean, it's as if this is such a normal situation for her. She just kind of laughed, and she said, and this, by the way, was a clear case of statutory rape in California. So it should have triggered mandatory reporting law for her because of my disclosure. But instead, she laughed, and she said that I should figure out a birth date that works. She tells me to lie about my age on the paperwork so that I could get a secret abortion there and there'd be no questions asked. That same day, I went to a second Planned Parenthood with very similar results. And I realized, this is wild. There is no reporting happening here. They could care less. Their focus is to sell abortions. It is not to figure out what dire straits these young girls are in. They just are selling abortions.
That is just mind-boggling. I'm sure your knees were knocking as you're walking in there, just with all of this going through your mind. What was it like coming out of those clinics? You've got this evidence now. You've got something that can hopefully derail or throw a major hurdle or maybe even shut down these clinics, what were you hoping that this evidence would be able to achieve? And what was the actual outcome when you started to present this maybe to the people around you and further beyond that? What were you hoping for, and what was really the outcome of those first stings that you did then?
Well, I mean, honestly, at the time, I was really focused on exposing my campus because they were not providing pregnancy support for women, and they were just, basically also selling abortions. And so and I had done an expose on them first. And so when I reported on what was happening in the Los Angeles clinics in my student magazine Advocate, it was on the back page. The story of the Los Angeles abortion clinics. I was like, oh, it's obvious Planned Parenthood is doing this. I didn't think. I thought, in one sense, I thought, it mattered, but I didn't think that this would become a national story, at least not yet. I was very focused on solving, cleaning house on campus on my college campus. But when we did that, and I did send out a press release, I was like, well, this is a big story. I'm going to send out a press release. And I, bought a press release subscriber, subscription, like figured out how to do all of that. It was all very, self-taught. And when I sent that out, I got like a couple blogs talking about it, pro-life blogs mostly. And, because it was on YouTube, there were YouTube videos of the investigation. And I remember the first day, that had like 100 views, the YouTube video. And then by a couple days, it was up to like 10, 20, it was in the tens of thousands of views. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. People are actually paying attention to this. And that's because it was kind of going around the blogosphere. And then I got an email from Planned Parenthood threatening to sue me because of the videos. They had become alerted to the videos. Some reporter asked them from some sort of, news outlet that was beginning to take notice of what was happening. And that's when the story really blew up, because now it wasn't just some plucky college student, exposing this. Now Planned Parenthood was trying to silence it with a lawsuit. And then media started to report on the lawsuit because that was more, I guess, controversial than covering up sex abuse. I mean, again, it's the media bias issue. It's like they only could pay attention once I was getting sued as a college student. That was interesting enough. It wasn't interesting that abortion clinics are literally covering up the sexual abuse of little girls. That was not interesting enough. But all that to say, that catapulted the story more nationally. I had my first national cable TV interview on the primetime show at the time, like the #1 rated show. And then there was more media interest. But I realized too, okay, I just did this in Los Angeles at 2 clinics, 2, and already I found this. What about other clinics? And so that also made me start to think, broaden my horizons beyond California and UCLA and say, I should expose this nationally. And that will make the narrative so strong that hopefully most media groups can't ignore it anymore. Because it's not just 2 clinics in LA and some college student, it's now this national story. And so that inspired continuing investigative work throughout college and even, throughout my 20s. And we would end up at Live Action do major investigations annually of all different topics. They're still ongoing today. And over the years, we've got a fair amount of media coverage. Of course, they don't like to cover what we report because it's not favorable of Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry. But the good news is we've had a lot of traction through independent media. There's been a rise in that, which has been awesome. And that's been a way to get the word out, regardless.
It's tragic that, as a culture, we have the Me Too movement. The media, likes to have this facade that, they're for justice of all types, especially for women, especially for minorities and others. And yet the desire to keep this abortion industry running as normal, as much as possible,
right.
It just blinds them to the fact that there is a 15-year-old girl who's making some claims, and her abuser should end up, in a court of law and perhaps in prison. That's a real tragedy. I have to say, it's devastating to hear. And you just wonder, you were there as an investigative journalist. You were there to try and uncover some of the things that were happening. But as you said, you just have to wonder how many little girls, how many young girls across the nation, perhaps across the world, are in a very same situation that you were proposing, and that you were like kind of putting on yourself, but in a real life situation, and they just have no way to get out. Perhaps the Planned Parenthood worker is the first person they open up to because call for help. Maybe.
Often they are.
Yeah. And what do they get is, we'll take your money, we'll kill your child, and we'll do everything we can to silence up what you said so you can remain in the situation that you're in, and so that abortion can remain legal with no one else challenging it. So really, really devastating. Now, I wonder, so you did more investigative reporting more around the country. Were there some other things that you uncovered as well? So you talk about the child sex trafficking cover up and some of that. Were there other revelatory moments for you as you were uncovering more and more things about Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've done probably 8 to 10 major national reports on different elements of the abortion industry, and investigative reporting has been, undercover reporting has been a component. And so, sexual abuse cover up was one, the cover up, aiding and abetting of sex traffickers at abortion clinics was another, medical misinformation that they tell to women pretty frequently, straight up lies about fetal development, the abortion procedure, really horrific late term abortion practices like born alive infants in abortion clinics that we've documented, where the workers or the abortionists express that they would kill a born alive infant, even though, of course, that's infanticide. But I guess it shouldn't shock that they would do this. They'd kill the same baby, minutes earlier in utero. So we've documented that. The sexual education practices that go hand in hand with abortion providers. So Planned Parenthood is one of the main sex educators in the United States, believe it or not. They receive tax money to do that. And the way that they teach sex education is not just immoral in the sense that they're promoting promiscuity and sexual deviancy, but it's physically harmful. I mean, some of the practices that they've promoted are sadomasochistic practices to young girls, risky sexual behaviors, misinformation again about the harm that early sexual exposure can cause. That's a whole other element. So I could continue on. I mean, lies about services is another investigation. We've done a lot. There's been a lot. And one of our former employees and a great friend of mine also did a phenomenal investigative report along a similar vein recently, which you guys probably saw in the last few years, on exposing the body part sale and trafficking happening at abortion clinics. That's yet another element. There are so many illicit and unethical practices in these abortion clinics. And and this is for a few reasons. Number one, because when you kill children, you lose your moral compass. I mean, it's very hard to maintain a moral compass when you're literally involved in killing children. Number two, state authorities, media groups, watchdog groups, they don't care. They don't really investigate abortion clinics because it's the political football or this political sacred cow of abortion. They somehow get a pass constantly. And then number three, the general taboo of abortion. People not really wanting to talk about it, it being so highly charged for people, that also has prevented information from spreading. And so that's why, we've done this investigative work, and why I think it's so important.
And I think it's so important for more and more people to be aware of this, because as both you and Peter have mentioned, Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers around the world are lauded as these great beneficial educational groups and whatnot. A question that I'm curious about. So obviously you do all of your research before going in on these sting kind of operations and whatnot. Has there ever been a moment where, obviously it's not a matter of like going in with a clipboard and trying to tick off all of your questions. Was there ever a moment where it was like, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? A moment of panic when, okay, you get moved into a different, not to dig up these horror stories or anything. I don't know if you have them, but I'm curious, was there ever a moment when in the midst of something you think, oh my, what have I got myself into? Why couldn't I have just gone down? Why couldn't I have just stayed in the classroom and kept presenting within those things, I guess?
Well, there were definitely a lot of close calls doing undercover work in abortion clinics. There are a lot of horrific sights, women vomiting in hallways, blood, just women who are very obviously pregnant and, they're going to leave with that child being butchered. I mean, really heavy, heavy stuff. I mean, these are the darkest places in the world, I think, abortion clinics. And so there's that element. There's the element of surprise. We want to stay undercover. We're not there to be detected. But, there have been definitely close calls with that have been nerve-wracking. but I think the perspective always is, this is a job, in the sense that, this isn't like, this is a very serious thing that we're working to do. And also, the victim, the hero, whatever you want to say, of the story, we have nothing to do with. We're simply there to try to expose the truth. And the victim are the children that are being killed. I'm safe and protected. If someone tries to murder me, you can call the police. I have someone to call. The children don't. And then also, the real people who are heroes here are the people that, despite the odds, are choosing life, and who are pushing back against, the culture they're swimming in. That's so, just have an abortion, just have an abortion, just have an abortion. I've been privileged to talk to, just last week, I was interviewing a sexual assault survivor, of a brutal gang rape, who chose life for her son. And, people bullied her to have an abortion. It's like, oh, pro-choice. No, they were like, oh, it's a rapist baby, you don't want to do this. And she chose life. And so you just hear these incredible stories. And I think doing undercover work, it's all about mindset. And the mindset is, okay, what's my job? Why am I here? What's my role? And that really keeps the focus. So you don't get, freaked out or all up in your head. You're just very focused on accurately portraying your role and, doing your mission to serve the greater cause.
Thank you so much. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, standing up for women and children, and have been doing for the past little bit. I'd like to transition a little bit into where live action has gone from then, and perhaps where you are today, because I'm going to make the assumption, I don't know this offhand, but I'm going to make the assumption that Planned Parenthood, got a hold of your face, probably posted it in Planned Parenthoods, let their clientele know, or let their their staff know, if this person walks in, make sure you send her right out the door that she came in. So once people started to get to know you, once they saw your videos, once they recognized that you were coming in their clinics, not to get an abortion, but to expose some of the things that they were doing behind closed doors, how did live action? Did you change your focus with live action? Did you transition a little bit? Was your team grown by then? Could you tell us a little bit more about how you kind of expanded live action and went on from, okay, I can't go in these clinics by myself, but this is what else we can do here?
Sure. It's a good question. So early on, I wanted to just, use whatever gift I had to maximize it. But I quickly realized that, I needed to build a bigger team. And I always had a team that I was working with, that I was, I'd recruited, or, friends that had come on board or whatever. And so, there was a time when Planned Parenthood did have wanted posters of me up in their facilities. And I did disguise myself. I bleached my hair blonde and wore glasses and, tried different things. But ultimately, it didn't really make sense for me to continue to go undercover myself. And it didn't always warrant that. We actually had, used investigative reporters who actually were pregnant. We had different scenarios. So ultimately, I would go on to recruit other people, build a network, build a bigger team, build an organization, raise more money so I could hire more people. And all of that was the slog. That's the the sort of unglamorous day in, day out hard work of organization building, but it's so necessary and it's so important. And, just one step at a time, and worked on that for a long time. And so now Live Action has a great team and, a phenomenal team. And we do investigative reporting to this day, but I'm not, necessarily in the very thick of it. I'm definitely involved, but not in the way I was in the beginning.
Yeah, I think about that, the things we do behind the scenes. I mean, there's some stuff we like to put in the newsletters, but the regular day-to-day stuff just isn't as riveting as some of the, on the streets work that we do. Cam, jump in, sir.
I was just going to ask, so I'm sure that like a lot of different pro-life organizations, you'll get either suggestions or requests or whatnot. Just out of curiosity, somebody approaches Live Action and say, hey, I want to do an undercover journalism opportunity here in my hometown. I'm sure that there's some listeners who are going to listen to this episode and be like, oh my goodness, I want to be just like Lila. I'm sure that you've heard this before. I'm sure that when you give presentations at high schools and colleges and whatnot, people come up with their own plans to do these exposés on their local abortion facility. Does Live Action have a protocol for how to actually equip people with what they would need to know, or give them some degree of instruction? I remember speaking with a couple of pro-life heroes here in Canada, Mary Wagner and Linda Gibbons, who go into abortion facilities and try to counsel women out of choosing abortion. They've been in prison on countless occasions, and they encourage people, don't just randomly go into a place and have a plan, have that sort of thing. So if somebody was thinking about trying to do an expose with their local clinic, do you have a protocol, or what would you say to them, I suppose?
First of all, I think if someone's listening and feeling inspired, like, oh, I want to get involved in pro-life work, awesome. We need you. But I would just urge you, don't just do something because it sounds cool. Investigative reporting it's not glamorous. It's not, maybe it seems exciting, I guess, like a Navy SEAL is like sort of, exotic, but Navy SEALs work their butts off, and I'm not saying you have to be a Navy SEAL to be an investigative reporter, but I'm saying there's a tremendous amount of work that goes in the background. I didn't go undercover, but by the time I went undercover, I had been studying the abortion industry for over 5 years. So it wasn't like I woke up and I was like, oh, this sounds interesting, I'm going to try it out. There was a bit of a serendipitousness to it in the fact that I had come to UCLA, I'd started the magazine, I met James O'Keefe, so there definitely was an alignment of opportunity, but it was the result of also a lot of intentional work that had already been done, and then later on, as we developed the program, there was a ton of intentional work that went into it, as well as getting legal support, getting more formal training, a lot of other pieces. So if someone's listening, they're like, I want to go undercover. When we get emails saying like, I want to go undercover, we're like, we usually redirect the person, like, here's some ways to get involved, but we don't say, okay, great, get your camera, go do it. But we don't want to dissuade people from getting involved in pro-life work. I just think that there's really meaningful ways that beginners can get involved, and I would never squash someone's creativity. Obviously, if you feel called to do something and you do your research and you spend your time studying, God bless. Like I really hope that you're successful in your own mission. But when we get inquiries, we have a list of ways that people can get involved that we recommend, and they do not include walking into an abortion clinic undercover. That's not like a something to do just you wake up one morning and you do it.
Right. That's extremely good advice. And I like the point, when you started Live Action, you were focusing on education. You educated yourself beforehand. So as pro-lifers, it's vital for us to get education on what the abortion war is like, on how to effectively engage with other people, how to effectively engage with the culture and see people change their minds on abortion. So I know we in Canada, if you're in Canada, we do training here at the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform. I'm sure you guys do as well at Live Action. I've one question as we slowly start to wrap up this episode. So Planned Parenthood threatened you with a lawsuit. Did that go anywhere? And have you seen other lawsuits like that as you continue to reveal more and more about what's happening behind these closed doors?
So that did not go anywhere. I don't think their case was very strong. And I think it also was a public relations nightmare because they're going after a college student and a young woman, which very much goes against their narrative that it's like old white men that are controlling, pro-life activism or whatever. But that being said, my friend David and my friend David Delighted and Sandra Merritt, are right now being prosecuted by the state of California for their investigative reporting in the state 5 years ago. So, the stakes have gotten greater, and there are real attacks. I mean, the amount of persecution that they've undergone for their reporting and the particular approach that they took is absolutely unprecedented. There's an incredible double standard. I mean, there are undercover reporters in just the last few years exposing things in California, chiropractors' offices, marijuana factories, different things. And they went undercover, no problem. The state of California left them alone. They're fine. But when a pro-lifer does it, exposing Planned Parenthood selling body parts, instead of going after the Planned Parenthood affiliate in California, they didn't touch them. Planned Parenthood was donating to the campaign of the prosecutor, the attorney general, who goes after my friends. So that's just the corruption, the complete dirty politics in my state, and what's happening right now. So anyways, all that to say, I've been very fortunate, blessed to not be the victim of extraneous lawsuits. I'm grateful for that because Live Action's been able to do a lot of other things. You know, we don't just do an undercover work at Live Action. We have a huge education program through videos and courses and a lot of other approaches to talk about abortion and educate millions of people on that. But there definitely are attacks on pro-life reporters in the United States. And I think my understanding is in Canada. I mean, Mary Wagner, not a reporter, but obviously has been, treated terribly by Canada.
I'm glad that you mentioned the educational resources that you have at Live Action. I've had the opportunity to go through some of the online courses and whatnot that you guys have available. I can't recommend them highly enough. As we start winding down here, Lila, as you've mentioned a few times, you have recently written a book about to be published coming up here later this year called Fighting for Life, Becoming a Force for Change in a Wounded World. There's a million questions I'd love to ask you about this book, about the writing of the book and all it entails. I don't want us to spoil anything because I really want people to check out the full story. Can you tell us a little bit more, though, about your decision to write this book and what somebody could expect? I know that you can do a pre-order now. What could somebody expect in purchasing and reading through this book?
Sure. Well, I've been thinking and praying about writing a book for probably a decade now. I've always wanted to write. When I was a little girl, my dream was to be an author. So it's definitely very exciting to get to finally write a book. But I prayed a lot about it, and I was like, the time isn't right yet. The time isn't right. But when I hit my early 30s and I looked at where Live Action had gotten and where our movement had gotten, I realized we need more tools to inspire the next generation, and not just the next generation in the sense that younger people, but just people that also feel called to make a difference. And I realized, wow, I have 15 years of being in the trenches and learning lessons, not just activism lessons, but learning personal lessons about leadership, about standing up when something is controversial, about being lonely but persevering, about having your insecurities and your own personal wounds and drawbacks, but still finding the courage and the confidence to stand. And I was like, I really want to share all of this with others so that they can be inspired and encouraged. And that's the heart of the book. The book is the story behind the scenes of Live Action. It's my personal story. It's my family's story. So it's some very personal stuff I haven't shared before. But it's also designed as a guidebook or a manual for others who feel called to make a difference, called to fight for a cause, pro-life or really any just cause. But they're looking for inspiration for how to start. And they're looking for courage and, direction for how to stand, especially when it's unpopular. And that's what the book Fighting for Life is about.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. I'm just wondering, where can we get it? It's on Amazon. It's everywhere. We can pre-order. And when will it be coming out?
Thank you. Yes, it's available for pre-order now. And actually, if you go to fightingforlifebook.com, there's a pre-order special. So you get the study guide, which my parents-in-law, actually, I'll share this very personal. My parents-in-law, I married an amazing pro-life man who has amazing pro-life parents who are educators themselves, professional educators. And they worked on the study guide with me. They just did a phenomenal job to really help it, complement the book and what you're learning. And then you also get the first chapter free. So if you want to read the first chapter already, like today or tomorrow, you pre-order Fighting for Life wherever you order books, Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whatever, Books A Million. And then you go to fightingforlifebook.com, fill out the form, and they will send you the study guide and the chapter. So that's what my publisher's saying. Make sure to tell people. I keep forgetting. You can get it this week, the study guide and the free chapter. And then the book comes out on May 4th.
May 4. Okay, sweet. Okay, fightingforlifebook.com, everyone. Go check it out after you buy the book on Amazon or wherever you buy your book. We're going to put the link in our show notes as well. So if you forget or if you're trying to frantically write this down, just check our show notes, click the link, and you will be there. One more thing before we go. How can we find more about Live Action? How can we get involved? How can we reach out to Live Action with any other questions that we might have?
Thank you, guys. Liveaction.org is our website. We are all over social media. Live Action, whether it's Instagram or Facebook or TikTok or whatever, wherever you are, Twitter. I'm Lila Rose or Lila Grace Rose as well on the different platforms. So a lot of the content I put up on my pages. And yeah, there's, a lot of videos on YouTube. You can check that out. But I hope that the content is helpful to you. One series I definitely recommend is called abortionprocedures.com, something that Live Action developed working with former abortionists. It's very much in the spirit of CCBR and, your work, Greg Cunningham's work, but it is a slightly different tack so that it won't get censored by social media. And it's actually really powerful for people who are pro-choice and they don't want to be, offended by, something gory, but it's actual medical animations of the abortion procedure. It's still incredibly compelling. So that's another tool for folks. So yeah, check out liveaction.org.
I'm looking forward to talking to you in another episode about the videos that came from the conversation you had with Dr. Anthony Leventino. They're videos we've actually used on the streets as well, just in some conversations pulling up our phone. I will leave that for the next conversation that we have. Lila, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today.
You guys are awesome. Thank you, and keep up the amazing work.
Thank you. Likewise, right back at you. That was Lila Rose of Live Action. Those links, as we promised, are in the video description, so go check them out. Go buy her book and dive into that, about her story, about the lessons she's learned, and advice for those joining the pro-life movement now. Cam, give me your thoughts, sir.
Oh man, my brain is swimming right now. That was so cool. We've mentioned it before, especially after the episode with Scott Klusendorf and countless others of the guests we've had, but what an amazing experience to meet one of my heroes, one of my absolute heroes. I can't think of another word to describe it. Heroes in the pro-life movement, somebody who has been such a groundbreaker when it comes to exposing the horrors of the abortion industry and abortion itself. Peter, you and I are dedicated to showing the reality of what abortion does to preborn children and having those compassionate and compelling conversations. And so much of the work that we do relies on the information and exposés and whatnot that people like Lila Rose have done. And so that was so cool to hear her story, to learn the inside scoop on what those sting campaigns were like, what that investigative journalism really entailed. And I cannot wait to get my hands on this book. I will be pre-ordering it, and I'm looking forward to diving into it to learn more about her journey and the incredible themes that she has to share with people like us who are looking to become leaders in the global pro-life movement. And like she said, for any kind of justice-based movement, this is so important for people to be aware of, because it's not easy working for a nonprofit, but she has blazed the trail, and she gives some incredibly good advice and direction for how to thrive within that capacity. So I can't wait.
That's right. And as I promised in the episode, we are hoping to have another conversation with her shortly. So stay tuned for that. For those of you who are new to the Pro-Life Guys and aren't familiar with some of the other things that we do here, we have two other series that we run. One is called Humans of the Pro-Life Movement. It's a segment where we have short conversations with some of the activists in the movement, some of the unsung heroes, some of those who are going on the streets, perhaps day in and day out, perhaps on a volunteer basis, defending the defenseless, being a voice for those who don't have a voice themselves. They have some pretty cool stories of minds that have been changed, of lives that have been saved, and about their journey into the movement. Some of the stories are extremely inspiring, so go check them out on your podcast catcher or on YouTube. The second one is The Pulse, where we have a conversation once a month about important and interesting pro-life news from around the world. More abortion-related news from a pro-life perspective. We want to take this news and tell it ourselves. We want to be the people who tell our own stories ourselves and don't pass it off to pro-abortion media. We heard about pro-abortion media here with Lila and about how much they care for you and how much they care to, keep everything that they're doing, what's illegal, undercover and make sure it continues on as much as possible. So we want to tell our own stories, and The Pulse is an opportunity for us to do that. So go check it out. Once again, it's on your podcast catcher or on your YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for joining us once again. If you want to reach out to us with any questions, prolifeguys.com, or you can find us on your social media apps. Thank you again for tuning in. We hope you tune in again next time. God bless you all.